Jews collectively. They have no rights because they're subhuman, they're evil, absolutely evil. Hitler was convinced the Jews were absolutely evil, and therefore they had no rights, so they could be mass slaughtered. They could be stuck in concentration camps, worked to death, or, to speed up the process, give them cyanide and gas them en masse in their hundreds of thousands. It was Schmidt that made all that legally possible, so that, well, I think that's totally wrong. Everybody has rights. I don't care if you're Jewish, Muslim, an Eskimo, a Scot, even the English have rights. But it has to be equal, it has to be a level playing field. And men and women, and boys and gays and straight, everybody, Well, no, not in Carl Schmitt's mind or Hitler's. And that's the thinking that underlay the genocide against not just the Jews, by the way. The Gypsies had no rights, the gays had no rights, Jehovah's Witnesses didn't. Anyone that basically Hitler and his cronies didn't like, they stripped the rights away from them. Now, that's an extremely dangerous world to enter into. And at the end of the war, when there was fortunately that view was defeated, they then introduced the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was partly inspired and written by H.G. Wells, who was a great English thinker, writer, novelist, who was from Sussex actually. And when I lived in Sussex, where I grew up partly, I once for a time lived in a little cottage in a village called Trotton, and I got to know a very interesting elder woman in the village who knew H.G. Wells as a girl. Her dad was the blacksmith in the village. That was in like the 1910s, 20s. Probably before World War I, actually, so 1910s. And H.G. Wells was then teaching at Midhurst Grammar School in West Sussex, and he used to come round for tea and chat to the family. He wrote some great books, and he was interested in science fiction, and he was a visionary, really. He became a peace visionary because he was desperate to stop wars, like me. I've also written novels and plays and stuff, but much less than H.G. Wells. I've been more a philosopher. Wells also was a writer of science. He popularised scientific ideas. He thought that we could have a rational world system based on, sort of federal world government of rational, nations collaborating together. He was a supporter of the League of Nations and then of the United Nations, and he helped write the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is in this volume. It's very important that people read these documents and realise how profound they are. So that's the two, no, they don't have any rights, you demonise them absolutely, or you say, no, actually, it doesn't work, that's not fair. We all have rights, or none of us do. Well, I want to live in a world where we all do. And we also all have duties, because your right is my duty. If you have a right to food, then I have the duty to feed you. So rights and duties are like the double side of the same coin. Anyway, that was all an interruption, my reading the text, explaining why it's so dangerous that everywhere I see on social media and elsewhere, I see this absolute demonisation going on. It's like Carl Schmitt has suddenly appeared in a million different guises. That way of thinking. Well, I believe with Gladstone, when he talked about the need for an intellectual chivalry of ideas, in a quote I read out maybe last Sunday, he called for we may disagree with each other, but we should be chivalrous in our disagreement. So you have your rights to speak, I have my rights, and we can try and get truth. That's how intellectuals work. So anyway, everywhere we look, there's this polarisation of absolute evil. For example, those who support President Trump say that those who oppose him are paedophiles, Satanists, baby eaters, sexual perverts who kill children after abusing them, and so on. And that because Trump knows all about this and is trying to take them down, in quotes, so all his actions are justified, including reneging on numerous international treaties and declarations. But this seems to me like so much smoke and mirrors caused by black propaganda artists who want to raise this spectre of demonic forces behind the world, so that radical populist nationalist measures such as Trump and his hardcore right-wing white nationalist Christian Zionist supporters can then argue, we are the Knights of Light and they are the ultimate evil. But such people are also anti-intellectual and make the mistake of attacking everyone who doesn't go along with their absolutist denunciation of the other as absolutely evil. So, look, footnote, okay, this is difficult stuff, right? It's an advanced class in contemporary moral philosophy and political theory. But this is what I'm seeing, and I've been seeing it ever since Steve Bannon got his hand on the political machinery of the internet, because it was done in the 2016 election of Trump when Hillary Clinton was demonized in this way. You know, you'd see pictures of her with horns coming out of her mouth and blood dripping down, and they turned the Clintons into like a demonic couple. Now that was a deliberately targeted assassination. It was done with Obama. They've taken him down as, you know, like evil. And then it's being done to support Trump's persona on the internet now. I'm watching this. And there are these videos surfacing of literally, you know, that everyone that opposes Trump is a baby-eating Satanist and a paedophile, and you can watch them. They all have scary music, and Trudeau's part of this gang. You know, well, I'm sorry, I'm a Canadian liberal myself, and I don't accept Trudeau as a baby-eating Satanist. I think this is mad. This is bonkers. This is hardcore right-wing propaganda machinery, demonizing the other, the liberal, as, you know, a baby-eating Satanist. But it's important to study it and analyse it and see where it's coming from. And it works because people are gullible. I have friends of mine that send me these videos and say, Thomas, did you know that all these liberals are baby-eating Satanists? Isn't it terrible? I love Trump. There are people that, you know, have been fooled by all this propaganda. Oh, man. And where's it coming from? Well, it's coming from the pro-Trump supporters, obviously. And it's coming from nationalists and populists around the planet in different, you know, offshore accounts, God knows where, who are all, the thing they have in common is they hate liberalism, they hate internationalism, and they hate, and it's interesting that those kind of revisionist nationalist forces are exactly the forces that Hitler and Mussolini and Franco and Stalin and all the kind of extremists also supported. So, to go on. But such people, on the reverse side, now let's look at the other side, there are those who characterise Trump and his obvious ties to organised criminal gangsterism and hardline Israeli-American Zionism as serious cause for alarm. Footnote, I mean, this is, the FBI have just released some documents under Freedom of Information that pretty much conclusively prove that Trump's election victory was engineered with Israeli government support and internet operations, approved by Netanyahu and his gang of cronies, who've therefore been, parading Trump to instrument their agenda for the world, which is complete rescinding of a universalist human rights agenda. The hard right-wing Israeli nationalist populist government is in the hands of people that think very differently to that. And Trump is really their weapon. And people are, Alison Weir and so on have discovered the facts by pursuing the FBI. And it is a bit, it's unbelievable actually, that Trump is their stool pigeon. And all the stuff about Russia was just a red herring, in fact. Okay, so Right, so there are people that can, therefore, Alison Weir, for example, and others, can point to a whole legacy of interference in American politics by Israeli Zionists, starting with the murder of President Kennedy, the murder of Senator Robert Kennedy, as links in a long chain leading to 9/11, and on down to Brexit, and today, as evidence that criminal conspiracies of extremist Zionists are indeed operating behind the scenes and seeking to subvert all the norms that the post-war world society has sought to be governed by. Someone like David Icke articulates most of these viewpoints, although not being an intellectual, he does it mostly by ranting and finger-pointing rather than reasoned debate. But the point is, here we have two absolutely polarised, diametrically opposed viewpoints, which are taking up a great deal of noise in our public and social media right now. Likewise, the various theories and debates about the origins of the coronavirus. Again, it is a polarised clash of worldviews. Each side accuses the other of being in a conspiracy to hide the truth from other people. So that is the horizontal polarity. All this literally drives the nails into Christ's hands. Then there is the vertical beam of the cross, the upwards and downwards pointing verticality, which is where the transpersonal dimension comes down into Malkut, the kingdom, in the Tree of Life. Now, just a little footnote, if you're not familiar with the Kabbalah, the Tree of Life, I mean, go off and study it. It's premised on a diagram called the Tree of Life, which is the interpretative, symbolic, architectonic that you need to make sense when you study the Bible, whether the so-called Old or the New Testaments. I think they're all one, it's just the Testaments. And it dates from the oral traditions which predate official Judaism or the Hebrew religion or Christianity or whatever, and it goes back to a common oral tradition which would be like the Druidry of the Middle East, if you want, the oral teachings, or the Daganawida teachings of the Middle East. And they were they realised that life operates in a polarity system of male-female, but a complementary polarity. And then there's a central pillar of these 10 Sephiroth, which all have different names. The top Sephiroth, called Keter, is the crown Sephiroth, which is the place of enlightenment, which is potentially there within all of us, it's just not actualized. These are like lights on a Christmas tree, and they haven't all lit up. You know, when Christmas tree lights come out of the box, they don't always work, and you have to fiddle about. Well, we're in that state as a planet. And then the grounding one is called Malkut, the kingdom, which is the earthing, the grounding Sephiroth. And what it was shown to me in the dream is that the central beam of the cross is the polarity between Keter, the heaven worlds, and Malkut, the kingdom. And what Christ was trying to do was to ground the kingdom of heaven into the earth. That's why his prayer every day, thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. That was literally, he had become the living tree of life to ground that energy from the divine world into the human world. Anyway, this was all shown to me in this dream. And that the importance of the central pillar is grounding the transpersonal dimension from Keter into Malkut, the kingdom, in the tree of life of the Kabbalah. And it seeks, therefore, to bring earth salvation, healing, grace, understanding, and wisdom. Now, whereas anti-Zionists, who are sometimes also anti-Semites, scream against the Kabbalah as the root of all evil, David Icke seems to take this view. And the actual Zionists running Israel, or I call them pseudo-Zionists, who appeal to the Israeli people and the religious vote to keep them in constant power, like Netanyahu, they misapply and misinterpret the teachings of the Kabbalah. as if they give rights and privileges only to the children of Israel and to no other people on earth. Not Christians or Muslims, certainly not pagans. Well, from the point of view, this is wrong. I mean, you can't say only our people have rights, we the Israelis, how do you define that? That's committing the Schmidt error. It's such a weird paradox of history that the very argument Schmidt was using, like they don't have rights, they're subhuman, has now been transposed into Israeli legal thinking. Oh, they're Palestinians, they don't have rights. And that's how people like Netanyahu think. It's a weird, Hegelian inversion of the dialectic, that the opposite transmogrifies into the opposite. And so, I go on to say, well, both sides of this polarity are in fact wrong from the point of view of the central pillar, the upstanding beam of the cross, which represents authentic Christian Kabbalah or Gnosis or primordial ancient Kabbalah. And I think this is what Christ himself was teaching, where he was coming from. He taught, after all, we should love our enemies and follow the golden rule in all matters of morality, just as the other great sages of humanity always asked us to do. Confucius, Buddha, Lao Tzu, Mahavira, all of them. So, the vertical beam of the cross, therefore, offers us a way to end all this extremist polarization and to ground true peace back into this troubled plane of being. So anyway, that's a quote from my foreword about this little book of peace declarations, and I just wanted to share that because it's a dream. It came to me. It's a gift, really. I think that we've just had Easter. We're just coming up to Pentecost, in fact, and this represents the inner meaning of it. To me, what Christ was trying to do was to heal and reconcile and get us away from this dualistic, I hate the other way of thinking, and convert it to an I love the other way of thinking. It's still that radical love that Thomas Merton and other great Christian mystics have tried to bring to bear in our time, like Martin Luther King and others. It's what St. Paul saw, to learn to love our enemies is not easy. It might have a cost. They might persecute you and stick you in prison, as Steve Biko and Nelson Mandela experienced, or many great peace visionaries have had to be persecuted because the mob, the anti-intellectuals, the people that believe they're absolutely right, will immediately target you and demonize you as you're part of the evil lot. Well, no, I think there has to be space for people that want to stick to that central pillar of transpersonal realignment, and want to get away from this dualism of absolutes, good and evil. Because to me it seems that good is the circle that surrounds the entire cross, and that's why the Celtic cross often has a circle around that whole cross shape, because the circle is what brings it all into its bigger cosmic contextualization, which then is peace. So anyway, and it turns it into a mandala shape, if you want, so as Jung would explain. Anyway, there we are. That's that dream, and I wanted to share that. I think it was pretty cool. But the question remains, therefore, how do we transcend this demonization that's going on? I think we have to challenge it at its root. So you have to learn to develop an antibody, an intellectual antibody. You see, this to me is the virus that actually intellectually underlies the coronavirus. Whoever's responsible for this, whether it's a military weapons attack or something, I think it comes out of this dualistic, absolutist thinking. It could have been Chinese bioweapons developments in tandem with American, we don't know. We're in the dark, and I'll come back to that at the end. this is where I want to say I think the role of the intellectual, what I'm trying to do, and I would like to get your help in this, is this thinking together from the perspective of the central pillar. You see, there's a lot of demonization going on. I mean, there's a lot of anti-science going on, so we hate scientists, they're all evil. We hate, X, Y, Z. And then there are people that, hate people that think outside the box and want to question some of the, the unquestionable truths of science. So let's have a discussion about the scientific approach to coronavirus. Let's transform our weaponized science into a peace science. That's what the intellectual tradition of the central pillar stands for. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, we have to ask what is truth. We have to ask what is justice, because truth and justice are fundamentally the same thing. And we can't get either unless we get peace. So now I want to read a second quote from the foreword of my book, which is a quote from the writings of Acharya Mahapragya. And I mention this in relation to the International Criminal Court, whose founding declaration I give. And this is a body that's come into existence with the Treaty of Rome, the text of which I give, which is abolishing or trying to abolish and punish war crimes, genocide. There's a whole list of them. Really nasty, horrible, systematic rape, torture, the whole thing, war crimes. They just want to punish this stuff, and as the Nuremberg trials did. And the International Court of Justice can't do it because that only can punish nations, not rogue people that are doing war crimes within a nation, as say happened in the Serbian-Bosnian wars and in some of these civil wars in Africa and so on. So the International Criminal Court is there to get people individually, because people are individually, we're all responsible under international law for my actions. If I go out and slaughter 10 people because I hate a certain hair colour, obviously the state would get me for crimes. But then if I organise a little rogue army and we take to the mountains and we're killing people and so on, and I start committing war crimes, then the International Criminal Court will come and get me. And quite right too. So, so then I say the following. So the International Criminal Court of Justice came into being in 1998, tries to deal with the tragedies of genocide and war crimes. Sadly, however, 4 signatory states, Israel, Sudan, the US and Russia, have all informed the UN Secretary General they no longer intend to become states parties. They're effectively withdrawing their signatures. They originally signed, now they've rescinded. Well, how can we manage to deal with international criminals on a massive scale then, such as commit genocide? What about, for example, Henry Kissinger, an influential and still living USA wheeler dealer, who, according to the late American-British intellectual Christopher Hitchens, was guilty of massive war crimes and political criminality? I once organised a meeting in the UK House of Lords discussing international criminality and global peace policy. What if it turns out that the people organising and generating most of the wars on our planet are literally criminals and seek to always evade the full impact of the law, both in their own nation states and internationally? If we think back on Hitler, Stalin, Mao and others who waged massive wars and committed crimes of mass slaughter and indeed genocide, we will see that they were in fact literally criminals. But instead of being brought to justice, they literally took over their respective countries' political systems and set themselves up as supreme dictators and tried to avoid justice in that way. Just a little footnote, that's what Caesar did. Caesar, was a war criminal in Gaul. He attacked the people of France, who were Celts, and he massacred 3 million of them. didn't spare Bourges up the road, etc. Did war crimes. And he was then asked by the Roman Senate to go back to Rome and account for his actions. Like, aren't you going a bit too far, Julius? Cicero and some other Roman intellectuals got a bit worried. Like, they're writing books about international law and stuff, and here's this guy running amok in Gaul in the name of the Senate, right? So they called him back and said, you're going to have to answer some questions. Well, what he did was, and which is shocking, is he marched on Rome with his army, and he shut the Senate down. He persecuted the ones that had been calling for him, and he took over the Roman state. His answer to having to go and give testimony for his war crimes was to just take over the state, because that way he ruled who were the courts. That's the Caesar move, and that's what Stalin, Hitler, Mao, and others have all done. Well, it's not acceptable. I'm speaking up here on behalf of Cicero and the Druids, right? In my Dictionary of Druid Studies I just published, there's a long entry on Cicero, whose brother served actually, in some of the Celtic world, and actually served on the staff of Caesar when he tried to invade Britain and didn't really succeed. So Cicero's brother would have met Druids and known them, and he understood, Cicero did, what Druids stood for, which was peace and ethics and spiritual law, the Tekanoida perspective. But no, so what happened to poor old Cicero is he was eventually killed in the chaos that followed Caesarism. Okay, so yes, now Netanyahu, who many people also say is a criminal, is at the moment desperately trying to avoid the Israeli court system from catching up with him for exactly the same reasons. And likewise, therefore, he refuses to acknowledge the International Criminal Court because he knows that in fact he is also guilty of war crimes. But what can be done about all this? Why is justice so slow? And injustice runs rampant on the planet like wildfire. Acharya Tulsi, who inspired Dr. Gandhi and his successor Mahapragya, about whom Dr. Gandhi has written an excellent biography, would explain that peace and justice are like the two sides of a coin. You cannot have one without the other. The Jain concept of justice is that of dharma. It's the same with the Buddhist and the Hindu, it's the same thing. It's the same with the Druid as well, because the word Druid means a dharma seer. It is the absence or presence of dharma in a society or an individual which permits peace, shanti, to arise. When dharma is absent, war, conflict and unease will arise, just as when clouds cover the moon. The moonlight no longer shines. Mahapragya put it like this in a striking metaphor. Mere worship, and this is a quote from his work, is a shallow effort to attain dharma. The real depth is reached when worship gets combined with spirituality and morality. Once a man was engaged in digging a well. The water level was at a depth of 50 feet. He dug a pit 5 feet deep without any results. Then he dug a second pit, a third pit, and a fourth pit, and went on digging till he had dug 10 pits. Nevertheless, the results were disappointing. He was disillusioned. Similarly, a shallow effort to attain the state of dharma results in disappointment. If one extends this parable as a planetary metaphor, one could say that all our peace declarations and all the texts given in these volumes are attempts to dig wells down to the water table, to the level at which true dharma can be found. But many of them do not go down deep enough. And leaders who want to go on flouting the duties of Dharma want simply to ignore them or interpret them selectively, or seek to get out of them as Trump and Netanyahu are now, to my shame and consternation, the Brexiting UK are now doing, and as Saudi Arabia has been doing on matters such as interfaith or women's freedom and so on. They're all digging what Mahapragya would call shallow wells. But true peace will not come until all of us on planet Earth dig a well within our own being first, and dig through to Dharma in ourselves. Once we can do that collectively, then we can insist that our leaders actualize and live up to the fine declarations that are all in fact already in place, as these documents give us no cause for doubt. We already have even an interfaith peace treaty, as given in volume 1 of this book, and so many other explanations and declarations. What we need is the personal moral commitment to actualize them, both individually and collectively. Each of us needs to practice internal non-alignment. So that is what I mean by going to the central pillar of the tree of life, or the cross, if you want. And that to me is is what Mahapragya was meaning when he says dig a deep well. I mean, it's that bottom part of the cross going right down into the earth, into Malkut, that takes us right down to Dharma. If we each do that, then I think we can get planetary alignment and we can save this planet from self-destruction. Now I want to come to an update on the coronavirus, talking about planetary self-destruction. So I've been obviously, busy all week writing this book, and then also scanning in the evenings latest studies and research, and listening to discussions and debates and so on. I've discovered in depth, I've listened to a very nice man, an interesting Dr. Breggin, who's found some research from Nature Medicine in London that seems to indicate beyond a shadow of doubt that weaponized coronavirus research has been going on since at least 2015, 5 years ago. And he gives all the evidence, it's there in the Nature article, for God's sake. Nature is one of the most prestigious scientific journals in the world. It's published in London. I've even gone to back copies of it, starting when it was published in the 1830s, I think it was, or 1840s. And it starts with some quotes from Goethe. It was going back to that time when science hadn't yet declared war on philosophy, and there was still conversations going on between scientists and philosophers. I mean, there still are, obviously, people like Popper and so on, but we're in a minority because unfortunately scientists have taken to the increasing point of view that their work is the supreme intellectual effort of the planet, and that by studying this minute little thing through an electron microscope for years on end and knowing everything about it, that is the only intellectually important task for human beings to be doing. Well, I don't take that view. I take the view that whilst science is incredibly interesting and important as a methodology of knowledge, it's part of a more general work, which I address in my epic philosophical text, Being and Knowledge, which you can read the first 2 volumes of. I've done a kind of Being and Time, as Heidegger did, but for Being and Knowledge. And that's my most important philosophical work, if you want to know where I'm coming from. Study Being and Knowledge. And there I explain that science is just part of the strategy whereby being and knowledge interact. And it mustn't take to hubris thinking that its current methodology is sacrosanct for all time. I mean, science